Curiosity had led Clara Wren farther than courage ever could. It was what made her follow the thin trail westward through the snow, her bonnet trembling in the wind, her eyes searching for the faint promise of a better life. She had heard of a ranch, a large one, run by a man who paid in coin and not in questions. All she had to do was cook. That was what the letter had said, and that was all she wanted. To cook, to stay warm, and to not be looked at as something broken. The mule beneath her stumbled, hooves crunching through ice. A thin plume of smoke rose from the valley ahead, a promise of fire and shelter. Clara tightened her shawl around her shoulders, whispering to herself. Just a few more miles. She was 21, too young to feel this tired, too old to believe in rescue. When the ranch came into view, it looked less like a home and more like a fortress built to keep the world away. Fences cut through the snow like scars. Pines swayed, tall and solemn, against the white sky. She dismounted and approached the cabin door, her gloved hand trembling as she knocked. The man who opened it was not what she expected. He stood tall, perhaps in his 30s, dark hair dusted with frost, a quiet strength resting on his shoulders. His eyes, gray like the winter sky, did not soften, yet they did not wound either. For a moment, they simply regarded her, and in that silence, she felt both examined and spared. "You're the cook?" he asked. His voice was deep, worn smooth by solitude. "Yes, sir," she said, her breath forming little clouds between them. "Clara Wren. From the notice in town." He nodded once. "I'm Eli Maddox. Come in before you freeze." The heat inside struck her like memory. Pine logs burned slow in the hearth, filling the cabin with a clean, resinous scent. The space was neat, too neat. Every item in its place, as though order was the only thing keeping the man upright. She stood uncertain, dripping melted snow onto the floor. "You can set your things by the wall," he said. "Kitchen's through there. Start tomorrow. I'll show you where to sleep." She followed, her boots echoing against the floorboards. The small room he pointed to held a narrow bed, a wool blanket folded tight, and a single window facing the endless white. She whispered her thanks, though he'd already turned away. That first night, Clara lay awake listening to the storm batter the roof. Somewhere in the house, Eli moved about with slow, deliberate steps. There was no sound of laughter, no hint of another presence. It was a house that breathed in solitude and exhaled silence. Morning came gray and cold. She rose early, kindling the stove, her fingers numb until the flame caught. The scent of coffee soon filled the air, and she found comfort in the routine. When Eli entered, he paused at the doorway, as though startled by the sight of another person moving through his space. "Didn't think anyone wake before me," he murmured. "My father used to say the day's cleaner when you catch it early," she replied, setting out bread. A faint curve touched his lips. "Smart man." "He was," she said softly, and though the words were simple, they lodged somewhere deep, pulling behind them the weight of loss. Eli ate in silence, the firelight throwing gold against his weathered face. Now and then, he glanced toward her, not intrusively but with quiet study, as if trying to understand what kind of woman worked without complaint in such desolation. When he finished, he said, "You cook fine. That'll do." Then, almost as an afterthought, "There's gloves by the door. Where am when you haul wood?" She thanked him, though he had already stepped outside into the wind. As the days folded into one another, a rhythm settled between them, simple, wordless, steady. She cooked, mended, swept. He worked the stockyard, tended fences, fixed what broke. Sometimes, in the evenings, they shared coffee near the fire. Their conversations were brief but growing in shape, like frost etching glass. One night, as she peeled potatoes, the memory of Mrs. Calloway's warning drifted through her mind, the sharp-tongued woman at the boarding house who had sneered when Clara mentioned the Maddox ranch. "That man doesn't hire women for cooking, dear. He hires them because the mountains are cold, and he's rich enough to want company." The words had stung then, they stung more now. Yet in all Eli's quietness, Clara had seen no cruelty. Only restraint. a kind of stillness that came not from arrogance, but from sorrow too old to voice. Late that evening, while cleaning the hearth, she caught him watching her from the doorway. His expression held something unreadable, a soft frown like a man trying to remember how to speak. "You work hard," he said finally. "Most folks don't last up here past the first freeze." "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted. He nodded, as if he already knew. "Then I'm glad you came." It was a simple sentence, yet it rooted itself inside her. No man had said such words to her in years, not with sincerity, not with gentleness. That night sleep came heavy. Through the wall she could hear the wind, the whisper of snow against wood, and once, the sound of Eli's boots moving across the floor, slow and rhythmic. She wondered if he was as awake as she was, each of them strangers stranded together in the same storm. The following morning, when she reached for her gloves, she found a new pair beside them, thicker, softer, clearly his. A folded note rested on top. The handwriting was steady, the message brief. Can't work well if your hands are frostbitten. Keep these. She traced the ink with her thumb. The gesture wasn't grand, but it made her throat tighten. She wore the gloves the entire day, pretending not to notice when he glanced at her hands, satisfied they fit. Snow kept falling. The sky stayed heavy and white, pressing down upon the earth until every sound felt muffled. Yet inside the cabin, something was shifting. Clara found herself humming while she cooked, her voice low and warm. She caught Eli watching her once, his face softened by firelight. Neither spoke of it. By the week's end, the snow had deepened past the window ledges. The outside world vanished, leaving only the two of them and the steady crackle of fire. That night, as she ladled stew into bowls, she asked, "How long do winters last out here?" "Long enough to test what you're made of," he answered. Then, with a faint smile, "But they don't last forever." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this frozen place, this man, this quiet could thaw something in her that grief had turned to stone. Later, when she stepped outside to fetch more wood, the air was sharp and still. The ranch stretched endlessly beneath the pale moon, fences half buried in snow, smoke rising from the chimney like a prayer. She stood there for a long time, her heart steady, her breath clouding before her. Behind her, the cabin light spilled softly into the night, a beacon of warmth against the endless white. Inside, Eli waited by the fire, his face unreadable yet open. When she returned, he took the wood from her hands without a word, setting it beside the hearth. For a brief second, their fingers brushed, rough against rough, and neither moved away. In that fleeting touch, something unspoken passed between them. Not promise, not confession, just a recognition. Two souls, both bruised by loneliness, standing on the edge of something that neither dared name. The storm outside deepened, rattling the window panes. Clara turned toward the fire, her shadow long across the floorboards. For the first time in years, the sound of her own breathing did not echo back in emptiness. It mingled with his. And though she could not yet call it comfort, she knew she did not want to leave when spring came. The storm had raged for 4 days, swallowing the world beyond the cabin in a white hush. Inside, the fire never died. Clara moved through the stillness like a careful breath, her every motion quiet and deliberate. The air smelled of smoke and pine and something softer, trust, perhaps, though either of them dared name it. Eli sat near the hearth, his broad shoulders outlined by the glow. He mended a leather strap, his fingers steady, his expression unreadable. Outside, the wind moaned through the rafters, a mournful sound that made the little room feel both smaller and safer. Their words had grown fewer with each day, but their silences had changed. They no longer sat apart like strangers. Now, the quiet between them felt alive, as though something unseen had begun to breathe there. Clara kneaded dough on the wooden table, the rhythm of her hands keeping time with the storm's distant pulse. Eli looked up at her once, long enough for her to feel his gaze before it drifted away again. "You never said what brought you this far north," he murmured finally. His voice was gentle, but it carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Clara hesitated. The truth was a delicate thing, too tender to be spoken aloud, yet too heavy to keep carrying alone. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned toward him. I was looking for work, she said, and for a reason to keep breathing. Eli's eyes lifted, steady and searching. You find either yet? I'm still looking, she whispered. He nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching in something that wasn't quite a smile. That makes two of us. The wind pressed hard against the cabin walls, as if trying to eavesdrop. Clara returned to her dough, her hands trembling slightly. She wanted to ask what ghost he carried but stopped herself. Questions, she'd learned, could break fragile peace. That night, after supper, they sat by the fire. Eli poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one, the steam rising between them like a bridge. You said once your father was a smart man, he began. What happened to him? She stared into her cup. The drought took the ranch. Debt took everything else. My father took to drink, and the drink took him. Her voice faltered, but she forced it steady. When he died, there wasn't enough left to bury properly. I sold what I could and left. I thought maybe somewhere out here, I could make myself useful again. Eli's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed calm. You shouldn't have had to bear that alone. She looked up sharply. We all bear something alone. Don't we? His eyes softened. Some things aren't meant to be carried that way. For a long time neither spoke. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth that couldn't quite reach the space between their hearts. Then, quietly, he said, My wife died 6 winters ago. Fever took her before the thaw. Since then, this place, it's just been walls and work. Clara blinked, the revelation landing like a small, controlled explosion. You never remarried? He shook his head. Didn't see the sense in it. Folks in town call me rich, but what good's money when the house stays empty? The honesty in his voice startled her. It was not confession for pity's sake, it was truth offered like a gift. She felt something inside her shift, something that had been frozen since before the first snow fell. Later, when she rose to wash the dishes, Eli stood to help. Their fingers brushed over a bowl, and the contact stilled them both. His hand was rough, her skin chapped and red, yet the touch held a gentleness neither expected. She drew back quickly, her cheeks warm. He said nothing, only looked at her as though memorizing the outline of her face by firelight. When the storm finally broke, the world outside lay buried beneath a perfect silence. Snow stretched in every direction, glowing faintly under a pale moon. Clara stepped to the window, breath fogging the glass. It's beautiful, she said softly. Eli came to stand beside her. His voice was low. A man could almost believe the world's been wiped clean. She turned to him. His face was inches from hers, his eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of snow. Maybe it has, she whispered. He didn't move, didn't touch her, just let the moment hang between them until it felt sacred. Then, after a pause, he said, When I sent for a cook, I wasn't looking for one. The words startled her. She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. Then why did you send for me? His gaze held hers, steady and vulnerable all at once. Because I was tired of hearing only my own silence. Because I needed to remember what a home sounded like. Because, he hesitated, swallowing hard. Because I wanted to see if I could still feel something. The truth struck her like a heartbeat. She should have stepped back, but instead she stayed, her pulse rising. You hardly know me, she said, her voice trembling. I know enough, he replied. You came here with nothing but your will to keep living. You don't flinch when life is hard. You work with your hands, not your pride. That's more than most people can say. She shook her head, though her eyes glistened. Don't speak kindly to me if you don't mean it. He moved closer, his voice a whisper. I mean every word. Outside, snow began to fall again, light, slow, forgiving. The world felt suspended, every sound muted except for the crackle of fire and the unsteady rhythm of their breathing. He took her hand just barely, as though asking permission to exist beside her. She didn't pull away. I picked you to be my wife, he said finally, the words breaking like thawed ice. Clara froze, not from fear but disbelief. Your wife? Yes, he murmured. Not because I'm lonely, not because I need someone to cook my meals. Because I see something in you I thought I'd buried with her, the kind of quiet that makes a man remember who he was before the grief. She stared at him, her heart pounding so fiercely it felt like it might split her chest. You're asking me to love a man I barely know. I'm asking you to stay, he said, voice rough with sincerity. And if love finds us in time, then let it. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked toward the window, where snow drifted softly against the glass. All my life, she said, I've been waiting for someone to see me as more than what I can do. To be wanted for who I am when the work is done. Eli's hand tightened gently around hers. Then stop waiting. The silence that followed felt infinite. She stepped closer, their breath mingling, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a guest in his home. She felt like she belonged to the moment itself, fragile and fierce all at once. When dawn came, the storm had passed completely. The world gleamed in gold, and smoke curled from the chimney like a promise. Clara stood on the porch, her shawl drawn close, watching Eli saddle his horse. He turned, catching her gaze. No words passed between them, yet everything necessary had already been said. As he rode out across the frozen fields, she pressed a hand to her chest and smiled faintly. Somewhere deep within, a new warmth stirred, small, steady, unafraid. She went back inside, tending the fire, humming a tune she didn't realize she remembered. Outside, the snow shimmered under the morning sun, and for the first time, Clara believed spring might come after all. The cabin no longer felt like a place of work or refuge. It felt like the beginning of something that would last.